Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience. My name is Loren Schoenberg, and this is our Harlem Speaks series. We're now well into our second year, and as I look around the room, I see a really nice mixture of familiar faces and new faces, which is exactly what we're looking for here. For those that have not been here before, just to give you a 54-second summary of what's happening here. We're building a jazz museum. We've been up in Harlem for 4 years now. We're looking for a home. Looks as though we found a home, and hopefully we'll have some good news for you very shortly. But regardless of where it's going to be, it's going to happen. And a big part of it is the support and the wonderful thing that we have happening here twice a month. And on behalf of my board chairman, Leonard Garment, my co-director, Christian McBride, and the co-producer of the series, Greg Thomas, I'd like to welcome you to our office and to the museum in this nascent phase. You all know, and if you don't know, you should know the person who's here every day with me on the street doing it, which is Miss Wilhelmina Grant, who I'm sure you all know. And I'd like to mention that in the audience we have one of our previous Harlem Speaks honorees, a woman who not only danced at the legendary Apollo Theater, but is an historian of the first rank in my book. She has a collection that you wouldn't believe. And we hope to be able to mount an exhibit based on her career and on her wonderful holdings as soon as we can do that. That's Taja. If you look around on the walls, you'll see what these photos are, and they're really growing. These are the photos of the events. And I guess twice in the last year, we had 2 guests out of the 30 or 40 that we had who got ill or who had to cancel. So we had a jam session. I'm a saxophone player and got some musicians together, so we had an ad hoc jam session. So you should always come just in case the guest doesn't show. And at the last one, Taja got up and danced the Caravan, which was worth, if nothing else happens with the Jazz Museum, that was worth it. And, but something is going to happen. And anyway, many, many wonderful people that came tonight. I'd like to thank you all for coming. As I look around, with people associated with the wonderful Clarence Atkins, Miss Deborah Dale, Miss Paula Morris, of course, Maxine Sullivan's daughter, and one of the people who's been keeping so much jazz going. And again, if I start naming names, also the legendary record producer and person who's done so much for jazz over the years, Mr. Ahmed Erdogan is here. And, wonderful journalist for the New York Sun. I don't know about you, I don't like to editorialize, but I think the New York Sun has the best, leave the politics aside, but has the best arts page in town. I mean, it's unbelievable if you're interested in such things. And Will Friedwald back there does a lot of that writing. It's really, really, really wonderful. And we're also a proud member of the Smithsonian. Even in this stage, we're a member of the Smithsonian affiliates. We are an affiliate of the Smithsonians, and from Washington we actually have 3 people from their staff who came up tonight. Miss Joanne Flores and her folks, the back row. And Joanne was part of our keynote event, the photo of which is up here, which is a wonderful segue into our interview. I've always wondered, when you make a good segue, should you call attention to it? Probably not. But so, it's not a segue anymore. But Joanne was a member of this conference we had 2.5 years ago, that photo, in which we had folks from all over the place, the museum world, the arts world, great musicians, all kinds of people to talk about what the Jazz Museum should be and what our educational mandate should be. Now that photo, clearly, as everyone recognizes, is a takeoff, one of the many, many, many spin-offs of the famous photo taken for Esquire magazine, of which we're going to find out a lot about the genesis of it, that became, in my guest's wonderful, wonderful documentary film, one of the best jazz documentaries made, with the wonderful title that she actually came up with, A Great Day in Harlem. And the person behind that is Jean Bach.
That I've written the first minute and a half of my, I have turned it on. Okay. Yeah. I've written the first couple of minutes of our conversation out, so I'll just, am I on the air, by the way? Oh.
Just keep talking.
Keep talking. All right. Well, the opening sequence of A Great Day in Harlem, it's when Esquire decides to feature portraits of four important jazz figures in the magazine. And they were Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Lester Young, and Charlie Parker. They enter Art Kane. They got this fellow, Art Kane, who actually wasn't a photographer. I don't know how he managed to get in, but anyway, he said, I've got a better idea. Why not get all the musicians we can get and just have them posing in Harlem? He said, that's where jazz is flourishing. And he said, that's where it began, actually. He says all this in the movie. And so he said, rather than do it in a studio, he was saying to these Esquire editors, so they all thought he was kind of a nut, but they let him keep talking. And then he said, studio. I never had a studio, so he's carrying on. But he picked a spot just a few doors away from here. I think it's just across Park Avenue. It's between, it's this very street, and it's between Park and Madison Avenue. So I thought this was a fitting place to begin. Okay, you have questions, or I just go?
I've got questions,
Well, sure.
but you can go too. One thing, Jean, is your association with the film and with the photo. But I think what a lot of people don't know, who just know you as a filmmaker, they don't know about your years producing the Arlene Francis radio show. They don't know that you were the host of it. They don't know that you interviewed Carl Sandburg on down on the radio for years. And beyond that, about your lifelong, very close friendship with people like Duke Ellington and Miles Davis and Count Basie and people like that. And so as we work our way into the photo and the film, I'd like to start just by asking you about your early love of jazz music. And maybe I'll start with, since these interviews are recorded for the archives, for the Jazz Museum, when did you first lay eyes on Harlem?
Oh, really? That's a good question. But then I have a footnote to that, too. I went to school in Poughkeepsie, and you could get on the train, and, well, as you well know, because you came and played my 80th birthday up at Vassar, Bobby Short brought his whole orchestra up there to celebrate my 80th birthday, and it was quite, and CBS covered it. It was quite grand. Anyway, you could get on the train and get off 2 stops later, and you'd be at the Apollo Theater. So I was telling Tom just now, I was saying I used to come down almost every weekend. I saw in 36 and 7, I saw wonderful acts down there. So I did see. And then after that, I did have a tour of Harlem. I guess after I got through there, I did get a job in Chicago, and Stephen Fetchit was in New York. And he took me on a tour. He got a limo, and he filled it. He had buckets full of Bass's ale and what was the other thing? But Guinness's stout.
Oh.
And he would mix a bitter, horrible drink. Anyway, and they were sitting in the back seat with the ice cubes, and this driver took us to all these clubs. So that was in my profile. It was in the New Yorker. Before half these people were born, I was profiled in the New Yorker. But I did cover a lot of Harlem that night. I must say I didn't get a chance to go out too much normally at night in Harlem, but that was historic for me. And we wound up at a place called Jimmy Daniel's, and it was so marvelous, and the food was so great. And then Jimmy moved downtown, and we became friends.
Well, for folks who don't know who Jimmy Daniels was,
Well,
could you paint a picture of him?
He had started a club, I guess, in Paris. They called them Boîte de Nuit. And they had, Ahmed will correct me because he's the world traveler, but I remember there were usually 2 grand pianos sort of locked, and then they'd have a big basket of gladiolas on top of the piano, and there'd be 2 piano teams, and then some sort of effete gentleman would come out and sing, or maybe, I don't know, different entertainment. But then he started that here in Harlem and had a transplanted one. And I think the Rue Bonbleu was kind of like that. They had small clubs. Small is better than big, I think. They were wonderful. And Jimmy Daniels was this beautiful guy who went into retirement at the normal age when you do that. And then Bobby Short said, you really ought to keep singing. And he brought him out and recorded him for Ahmed's label. And then he had a concert at Town Hall that was packed, and then he died. I mean, Bob Nahas had a little dinner party for him afterward, and he went upstairs to bed and died. And Bob Bach said, what a way to go. I mean, he's there on stage with this beautiful Brioni dinner jacket, just has this beautiful record out, and he died in a blaze of glory.
You mentioned that when you came to the Apollo Theater that first time, you saw a lot of acts. And for those that don't take those kind of things for granted, who were some of the acts? And how could you paint a picture of some of the acts? And who were they? And what did they do? And how did they impress you as a very young woman?
Well, curiously enough, Marie Bryant was one. She was imitating Mom's Mabley. I didn't quite get that point because she was beautiful, and Mom's Mabley was in an old house dress and bedroom slippers. But she was sort of doing, part of her act was being Mom's Mabley at one point, except she sang adorably and danced divinely. Dusty Fletcher is the one we all remember fondly because, God, you'd see him every time. Everybody I knew had learned the whole act by heart. We could all recite it, and then the recording came out. They left some of the good stuff out of the recording.
Like what?
Well, he's looking up. He's drunk, of course, and he's stumbling around, and the cop is there trying to hustle him away. And he says, "No, I live here." And he's got this ladder. He's going to go up to the second floor because he's lost the key, and the ladder just kind of leans. I don't know, they fixed it with weights or something so we could not topple over. And he's yelling, "Open the door, Richard." And so at one point he says, that old lady across the street, she's saying, "Is that him? Is that him?" She's pointing to her friend. He said, "Yes, it's me, lady, and I'm drunk again." He was having, well then, I married a jazz musician who was with a big band, and the big bands always were part of the entertainment in these presentation houses. I guess they'd do a movie and then they'd have the stage show with a big band and a few acts, and they'd go back to the movie and so forth. So I got to see a lot of him because we'd be on bills with him, and then we all could recite the lines, and it was heaven.
What was Dusty Fletcher like off stage?
Oh, wait a minute. Is he no, the one I met was, I went to the house of Pigmeat Markham, that's right. Pigmeat was this guy in blackface. They put burnt cork on him. And they had this embarrassing, heartbreaking amateur show. The amateurs would come out, and if they weren't pretty good, they were terrible. And the audience was so cruel. My God, a whole bunch of sadists laughing at them and saying, "Get the hook," and everything. They were so mean. And this poor person, it wasn't bad enough that they were flopping, but then they had to dance off stage, and they had to dance the Hickey Ricky. And I have a friend now that calls me up, and I say, "Hello?" And he goes, "Da da 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 dee 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 da 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 dee 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 da da dee dee da da dee," and that's you dance the Hickey Ricky to that. And so then Pigmeat would come out, and if they didn't get up and dance off, he'd get a gun out, and he'd shoot the guy, every finger on his hand, and then they'd drag him off. So that was, I went to Pigmeat's house for dinner one night, and he made red beans and rice, and some sort of hog maw in there, which was delicious. Oh my God, it was so good. And my husband was out in California with some big band, and I went out right after that, and I said, "I'm going to make you something that's just going to be divine." Well, it was during wartime, and you didn't have anything, and you go to grocery stores, go to hardware stores, you couldn't get a place to cook. But I had this electric cooker. You stick the plug in the wall, and it heated stuff up, so I got all these ingredients that I'd seen Pigmeat making, and made this thing. It was just like fudge. You couldn't stand it. It was corroding your innards. The cholesterol must have been terrible. And we just left it there for days. We'd heat it up, and I'm still here. Both my husbands are dead. But he was wonderful. Pigmeat was a regular. And then Willie Bryant was another one who was a regular. He was very funny. He led the band, and also John Hammond's secretary worked for him, I think, or maybe it was the other way around. Anyway, I hadn't met him, but I did meet Pigmeat.
You mentioned, just in passing, being in a limousine, a tour around with Step and Fetch It.
That's right.
Now, Stephen Fetchit, someone who's, of course, is fascinating and,
Oh my
and
God.
very interesting because he stands for, in some ways, underlining a horrible negative racial stereotype of the day. And on the other hand, as I understand it, in those days, he was one of the wealthiest, for the moment, entertainers, very much respected amongst his peers because he was such a wonderful professional at what he did. How did you come to Stephen Fetchit's orbit? I mean, you're a young girl from the Midwest,
Yeah.
and the next thing you're riding around in a limousine with Stephen Fetchit. I mean, it's not for the mystery show, but you had something happen.
Yes, I was out one night, and he had some fellow named Broadway, a miniature person, who kind of did errands for him, and he sent Broadway over to my table, and he said, we bowed, he said, Miss, he said, Stephen Fetchit said he's playing at the Oriental Theater, I think this was in Chicago, and if you'd come around backstage tomorrow, he'd be happy to give you his autograph. Well, that was the most crazy introduction I'd ever heard. You think I was going to stay away? I was dying to see what was going to happen. So I went around backstage the next day, and he had Herman Chittison in his dressing room, and Herman Chittison was a wonderful piano player who wound up on, was it Duffy's Tavern, playing background piano or something? Anyway, he had been in Egypt, and some bombs had started falling. I think it's just before World War II, and he needed to get out of there, and so Stepp brought him back to America, but then had him as a slave from then on. He was just with him all the time. So I walked in, he said, hey, he said, lovely, sit down. He said, you want to hear some music? What do you want to hear? I was aghast. I thought, this man is like a trained animal or something. He's just saying, play. He said, do you want to hear Tea for Two? Play Tea for Two. Citizens started playing Tea for Two. So anyway, we did Chicago, and then we did New York, and it was an eye-opener. I went to the Elks Rendezvous, and I saw Louis Jordan. He's so marvelous. He's so good. I covered quite a bit of ground my one night out in Harlem, but it was memorable.
Your friendship, your decades-long friendship with Duke Ellington. I'm wondering if you could sketch that out for us. How did that happen?
Well, I'm of an age that I don't apologize about because I had such a lucky break getting born when I did. I used to call my mother up on my birthday and say, thank heavens you got me on the planet when you did, because I got to hear all the big bands in person and got to know everybody. People were accessible then. And the night I was graduated from this little girls' school I went to, we were dressed in party clothes, and my date said, where do you want to go? Do you want to go out afterward and celebrate? I said, I've never seen Duke Ellington in person, and he's at the Congress Hotel. Why don't we go there? He said, wonderful. He said, should we ask Mr. Ellington over to join us in a glass of champagne to celebrate your graduation? So I said, perfect. So when he got to the table, he remained standing. He was very proper. I said, you don't know how exciting this is for me. I said, you and Stravinsky are my two favorite composers. He said, I'm jealous of Stravinsky. Now, I found out, seeing him a lot after that. I went to all the record dates and went every night to hear him. When he was at the Sherman Hotel, he was there for 6 weeks. Harry Lim and I went there every single night except one when I was living with my father then. He said, what are you doing tonight? I said, well, Harry and I are going to the show. He said, you can't go there. Weren't you there last night? I said, yes. He said, that looks terrible. You have to see him. So one night, Daddy was a parent. I didn't go. But anyway, the whole thing about Ellington was that he would give you these outrageous compliments, and they were absurd. They were so ridiculous. But of course, I was fat and ungainly and fumpering around and 18, and I believed everything he told me. So he said, what are your plans, Miss Enzinger? I said, well, I'm going to Vassar. Oh, he said, what a wonderful idea. He said, I live near there. We'll have to get together. So when I got to college, I said to my roommate, I met Duke Ellington, and he couldn't be more charming, and he suggested that we get together in New York. She said, well, you're going to take him up on it, aren't you? I said, well, gee, I don't know. That was just one night he told me to come by. She said, I bet that you don't have the nerve. She said, I'll bet you a cashmere sweater. I said, what if I don't go? I said, well, that's when I'd have to pay her the cashmere sweater. I said, what if I do go? She said, well, I said, what do I get? She said, you'll have had the experience. So that was enough. So I went to I looked him up in the phone book, and I rang the doorbell. It was about 2 in the afternoon, and apparently it was a very kind of rarefied period in his life because his father had come to live with him just for those few months, and I just happened to hit it then. And this gentleman came to the door and said, "Yes, may I help you?" And I said, "Yes." I said, Duke Ellington invited me to come and pay him a visit, and here I am. Now, I look like the joke little college girl with a snap brim hat and a polo coat and the white gloves and everything. So I guess he figured she's harmless. So he said, "You step in." Well, the living room was pitch dark, because it was the middle of the night for these people. And they had draperies drawn all around, so the father did make an effort to push the drapes back a little bit so we get some daylight. And I waited a bit, and then in came Ellington, obviously just aroused, but in a stunning sulka dressing gown, very courtly, didn't have a clue who I was. "How lovely to see you again." My goodness, sat down and started to talk to me. And years later, my husband, Bob Bach, was making a documentary about Duke Ellington. Or it wasn't a documentary, it was just some kind of crazy entertainment program, but we had hoped that it would have a little more documentary element to it, and he got a few people who'd known Ellington over the ages to be witness kind of people to talk about him. Apparently one of Ellington's lines was he'd meet you and he'd say, "You have got the perfect personality. I'm writing this opera and I really need you for the first act." And you'd protest and you'd say, "Opera? I don't even sing. What is this?" "It doesn't matter. It's just, it's your presence. It's just exactly what we need." Well, I mean, he did this to men, women, dogs, cats, everybody, and everybody, you wanted to believe it. This is how I learned how to make a documentary. The director came and sat on the floor just out of the camera range, and he would pop questions at me, and he said, "Did Ellington ever say anything to you about an opera?" So he was waiting for me to say, "Oh yes," and he told me I'd be the star and all. I said, "Yes," but he didn't tell me I was going to be in it. He said he was writing an opera for Marian Anderson. Well, see how smart he was. He kind of figured me out right away. He figured, what would impress this person? Marian Anderson, wow. It worked. I was terribly impressed. Well, we know nothing ever happened to that opera, but Caspar Reardon, the harpist, was a friend of mine, and he said, "That one time I met Duke Ellington, he said the strangest thing to me." I said, "I bet I can guess what it is." He loved me on stage, and he didn't even mention the harp. So that was one of his... Oh, and then finally, when Bob Bach came into my life, we'd go to see Ellington, and he'd say, "Oh, I knew the pretty one was coming in because the walls were tingling." And so then Bob would top him, and say, "But did you notice what was happening to the ceiling?" And that was carving contest.
You mentioned before that you went to some of his record dates.
Oh, yeah.
Could you tell us about that?
Well,
Where and what?
I went to all the record dates in Chicago, and boy, they were historic. One was a small band date. I think it was Juan Tizo, and I was with a man named Paul Edward Miller, who wrote for Downbeat. And Duke said, "Listen, stick around after the date is over, because I got something to show you." He wasn't directing it at me, Paul. He said, "It's quite interesting." He said, "You'll see, it's a bass player who plays in tune." That bass player was this tall, skinny kid with this navy blue suit with wide white stripes and really looked kind of like a hayseed. And he came out, and they did those 4 recordings. Anyway, it's Jimmy Blanton I'm talking about. Yeah, I suddenly went blank on the titles, but anyway, I heard those, so I was there for that. And somebody, I guess it was David Haydu, was asking me about, I don't know what led into it, but I told him this story, and it showed up in his book, but he left me out, and suddenly it was Leonard Feather that he was. And that made me so mad. I thought, I own this one anecdote. I was there when Jimmy Blanton made his first record. Leonard hadn't even left England, I think, by that time. But at any rate, so I didn't get credit. So I'm on record now, everybody. I heard it. I was there for a date that drove Edmund Anderson up the wall, because Edmund Anderson wrote the words to Flamingo, and they were all set to record it here in New York. And then something went terribly wrong. Either the studio got unavailable or somebody couldn't make it, I don't know. but they said, well, we'll postpone it to our next date. So Edmund couldn't wait because he was really looking forward to being present when he was being immortalized on wax. But that the next date turned out to be in Chicago. So I went to that, and I used to rib Edmund about it afterward. And the terrible thing was that he apparently left the lyrics back in the hotel, and so he made up something in the release. And so everybody after that sang it, they didn't bother to buy the sheet music, and they would just sing his wrong lyric. And if Edmund had been there, he could have corrected it. Too bad. He flew it. And I was there for, let's see, what are some of the other great ones? Oh, well, he was playing at the Sherman Hotel, so were all these references to stuff at the Sherman Hotel, the Flaming Sword and all these different, and then he would always do, it's like letting your little dog carry the newspaper or something. Ellington would turn to me and ask me if the tempo was right. I mean, anything he did was sacred. I'd say yes, but he'd say, it was the Flaming Sword that sort of a da-da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, so he'd ask me if that was right, and so it sounds good to me. So okay, then we can play it. So he did put people on all the time, and as long as you didn't know he was putting you on, it was kind of fun. Listen, I believed it all. I didn't know why I took it all in, but I did see another side to him. I was up in Toronto at a Ellington convention, I guess, and they were. Loren and I belong to the, what's it called, the Duke Ellington Society, and they have a meeting in some different country every year, and this was in Canada. And they showed a film of Duke kind of putting some poor disc jockey on, and the poor guy was really walking right into these propellers. Duke was having a little chuckle to himself.
In the Ellington Band were so many unique personalities, and one of whom, it's funny, one of whom that so many people just seem so struck by and still kind of awestruck by and have such a warm feeling about was the great trombonist Lawrence Brown.
Oh, I'm melting. I've been madly in love with this. Well, he's dead now, but I'm still in love with him. I was so crazy about him. And Morris O'Dara, who was the president of the Ellington Society, had a brother who was a Lawrence Brown nut. And he had some kind of a family motto. I think they put it up on the bulletin board or something in their house. It was to his children. It said, love God, respect your parents, and stop talking when a Lawrence Brown solo is being played. I was so nuts about that guy. And so when he died, I was out in California just when he was on his way out. He looked terrible. I've got a picture in my DVD. It's not very nice of me because he was so madly handsome. But at any rate, I was there for his last moments. And then but I hadn't started the movie yet, which is such a shame. Bobby Short was very mad at me because he said, you didn't have anything about Lawrence in the movie. And it's true, I didn't. But in the DVD, I have a lot about him. Well, something about him that occurred.
What was it for those of us that didn't get to see him in 1937, 1938? What was it about Lawrence Brown?
Okay, well, by me, he was Rudolph Valentino on the trombone, and I thought if Rudolph Valentino knew how to play the trombone, he would sound just like Lawrence. And those things, yearning for love, and they're wrenching, they're beautiful.
Yeah.
And so as a present for my darling friend over here, I got a whole CD full of Brown solos. That was so lovely. Played that when I cheer myself up.
There were so many personalities in that band that you were around. I wonder if I just throw a few names at you, just see if you had any intersection with them. How about Sonny Greer? What was his role in that band?
Oh, so cheerful, so pleasant, so adorable, and upbeat all the time. And of course, when they were traveling in Europe, he would be the last one. There was a band manager called Jack Boyd, or road manager, I guess he was, and he'd have to round everybody up like a sheepdog. And the last one that he still couldn't find in someplace in town, go to all the bars and everything else, was Sonny, because he loved to party. And there's stories about him in England with the Prince of Wales, and stories about, I mean, he was just lots of fun, lots of laughs, and what I loved his drumming. I thought he was just perfect for the band.
How about the vocalist Ivy Anderson?
Well, that was a treasure. What a marvelous person. She was also very witty. I must say that went well in that band if you had a sense of humor, because you kind of matched wits with all these people. My first husband, the late Shorty Sharonk, and I used to go to the fights with Ivy and her then husband, or I guess maybe her only husband, and she'd start shouting at the fighters, "Come on, let's go home, Turkey!" You know, she was so unusual. And her husband's name was Marquis, M-A-R-Q-U-E, Mark C. Neal, and he and Shorty used to discuss the strange agglomeration of friends that their wives had. You know, well, my wife is so and so, because everybody adored Ivy, and she had quite a collection of people around her. She was a wonderful cook, and she had a restaurant, Ivy's Chicken Shack. And during wartime, Shorty suddenly fell heir to a large band, a big band, and so he got a booking in New York at the Glen Island Casino, and we didn't have enough front money to bring a whole band east, so he just brought the library and two key players, and the library consisted of 17 kind of black square suitcases, boxes, I guess, out of cardboard or something. And so we got a drawing room, and we stacked them all up in there, and I had a Liberty phone that would play a record, and then it would throw it across the room. I broke Blue Bubbles. I broke so many of my Ellingtons, because we had it in the John, had it sitting on the John. It would play about every fourth record. It would have a record changer that would suddenly decide to get rid of one of them. So that was too bad. But Ivy said, well, you know, they're only feeding you twice a day on the train going east, so you've got to make do for the other meal. You can decide which one you want to give up. And so I said, well, maybe breakfast. So Ivy said, don't worry, we'll pack up some stuff for you to take on the train. So every morning we would have this congealed, once delicious fried chicken, very delicate and tender, and beautiful baking powder biscuits, and I forget what else she put in there, but the first couple of days it was wonderful, but you know, it's a long trip from California. That was some.
How did Ivy? What was Ivy's presence like on the stage? How did she strike you?
Good question. She had great humor too, and she stood beautifully. And she said somebody had told her early on that she would do well only to wear white. And she said, it goes very well with my color. Now, she was quite dark, and she referred to her color a lot. She was very conscious of that. And she thought the white looked smashing. Well, I grew up in the era when they still had debutante balls. And I was at one party where Ivy and the debutante had the same dress on. And, of course, Ivy, with her stunning figure and everything, took this stage away. It was kind of too bad. But Bobby did a wonderful talk about her at the St. Peter's Church. They had a series of 4 singers. I forget. One was Mildred Bailey and Jimmy. What's the darling trumpet player? Who is it?
Jimmy Allen?
No. It's he played with
Jimmy Maxwell.
Thank you. Jimmy Maxwell was very tight with Mildred Bailey, and so he did a wonderful reminiscence of life with Mildred Bailey, because he played for her a lot on radio. Then Bobby's subject was going to be Ivy. He did the most interesting research and also added his own deductions about her beginning, because there really isn't anything on record, but he did find out that she kind of came out of a Catholic orphanage, and he had tracked her down. He figured, I think she had a middle name of some Catholics have a saint's name in the middle. She had some Mary or some name like that. And she started in Fanchon and Marco circuits. Fanchon and Marco were kind of an outfit that put together a whole stage show, so you didn't have to hire Dusty Fletcher and all these people. They just had a theme. It would be the Greetings Springtime, and then there would be costumes for the dancing girls, and there would be maybe a couple of acts of juggler or something, and they'd supply all this stuff. And Ivy was on the bill, and she toured, I don't know what cities. Bobby had all that detail, but it was very interesting that he had kind of figured out her early years that were never a matter of record.
You know, one thing that's so interesting about Ellington is that we know that he, you know, there was this ridiculous thought that he didn't write a lot of the music, and the guys made it up. And then, of course, when all the music was found down at this, when it was donated from the family to the Smithsonian, and you know, we could start to go through all the great Ellington music, you found out that, of course, yes, he wrote all this stuff down. He wrote it meticulously, like any great composer. You know, 90% of it was written, and then the guys improvised a little bit, but it wasn't done with smoke and mirrors. But you were around the band on record dates and that stuff. And I wonder if you could tell us, how did Ellington handle the guys in the band, and how did he handle spontaneity, and how did he create that?
Very interesting. He was very jocular, and it was kind of like good times, and they were all bad boys. You know, no discipline in that band at all. And he didn't crack the whip, but he'd kind of ride with their jokes and everything. And they'd be playing some blues that they'd be improvising, and then they had something that broke them all up as do 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 do. Who got dog? And then they'd all fall out and laugh. That must have been something terribly funny that they all understood. And they had kind of similar listening habits, so they were able to work these things out. Most of the time stuff was written out. He used a word I've never quite understood. I'd say, "What's all that stuff over there?" And he'd say, "Oh, that's some stuff I'm writing." He said, "I'm waiting for Teasel to come in and extract." Now, extract, does that just mean broaden the chords or make it into an arrangement, or what?
It was actually from Ellington's piano score. He'd write everything on a score, and Teasel would look at the parts and then write out the individual parts for all the musicians. I think that's what extracting.
Well, thank you. It always confused me.
Glad I could help. Much of your life up to this point has been waiting for that answer. But what about just one more name? Because again, this is just one facet of your career, and I think that all this gives a lot greater resonance to the picture "Great Day in Harlem," because so many of the people in the picture, although actually you were not involved with the taking of the picture itself, were close friends of yours. And
just a lot. And you know why that is? It's because I lived in Chicago in the 1930s, and as I started to say a long time ago, people were accessible then. You could get to know them, and I told you I was a big Hal Kemp fan before Ellington came into my life, and the arranger and pianist John Scott Trotter, and the drummer singer Skinny Ennis, and a member of the saxophone section, I think a fellow named Porky Dankers, took this absolutely stunning duplex apartment, rented it. The architect Andrew Rabori was going to be, I don't know, in Europe for a year or something, so they had this stunning place, and I became their friend. I was 15, and they treated me like a regular person. They were all into Gertrude Stein and Four Saints and Three Acts and Picasso and a whole bunch of stuff. So I was really getting my culture from those guys. So you could really form kind of semi-friendships with these. I mean, as much as traveling musicians can sustain. And my parents were getting a divorce, and so my date was my father, and he was heaven because he got right into the spirit of things. And we'd go one night to the Black Hawk and hear Bob Crosby. We got to know all those people. And then the one that we adored, we went all the time to the Bismarck Hotel to see Steph Smith. And that was just, so memorable. Well, I think of all the people, he's the most swinging musician in that whole picture for me. He just swung like mad. And so Daddy and I had a duplex apartment, and my bedroom and bath were upstairs, right over his bedroom and bath downstairs, and then the living room and so forth. So we were sort of separated from each other. But I did hear the phone ring in the middle of the night, and Daddy picked it up, and this voice said, "Hello, Mr. Enzinger, this is Leroy." And Daddy said, "I beg your pardon." And he said, "Oh, ha, ha, ha." He said, "My chauffeur got into a little bit of trouble, and he's being held down at the police station." Daddy said, "Who is this? Where are you calling from?" He said, "Well, I'm calling from Zanesville, Ohio, or someplace." I don't know. He thought Daddy would bail him out. I mean, it was, or the chauffeur out. I don't know. It was a strange situation, but we knew them that well. They could call us up and ask for bail money.
Your years knowing Duke Ellington and being around his band, as you mentioned before, your first husband was Shorty Chirac.
Mm-hmm.
who was a trumpet player, played in the Tommy Dorsey band and in the Bob Crosby band and
Well,
so many bands.
The Crosby band was after he had changed his whole way of living. He had started out as apparently a quite good Dixieland player, according to Jimmy Dorsey, who should know, and Jimmy was crazy about him. And he said he was kind of creative. Well, I mean, it's such a limited field, that Dixieland stuff, but apparently he had some ideas and they liked it. But then he heard Roy Eldridge, and boy, that was that major change in his life. So he wanted to be Roy Eldridge. I mean, if you ever saw him, it was going to be a little difficult. He was a blue-eyed blonde with a cute little turn-up. He looked like the Campbell soup baby, right? So he got a car like Roy's, which was a neat trick because he was only making $85 at that point with Gene Krupa, $85 a week. And he dressed like him, and he was leaning against this car one day, and Bobby Burnett, who was with Charlie Barnett at the time, another trumpet player, walked by and he said, "Shorty, what happened?" And Shorty said, "Man, when I change all the way." So at that point, he got a phone call from Gil Roden, who was managing Bob Crosby, and he said, "Listen, Shorty, one of those two guys, I never can remember which one it was, but Yank Lawson or Billy Butterfield, one of those fellas had just left the band, and they were about to open the Pennsylvania Hotel, and they needed this trumpet player for the Bobcats." And so he called Shorty and said, "Could you come in and just fill in?" Shorty said, "Well, I'm not playing like that anymore." He said, "Yeah, but we're desperate. I mean, we're opening tomorrow night. If you could just oblige. It's only going to be for a few weeks, Shorty." So finally he said, "Well, all right. We'll make it worth your while." Well, that sounded attractive. So he would play the first set, dinner set at the Pennsylvania. Then he'd jump in a cab and shoot up to 52nd Street and get his fix, and apparently a lot to drink. And then he'd come back and do the broadcast. So one night he got ill when he got on the bandstand, and it was a little apparent. And they said, "Listen, we understand. This isn't your dish." And they were very nice about it, and they let him go. But he was so plugged in. So then when Roy had a birthday, and Phil Schaap called me up, and he said, "Everybody's going to record a birthday greeting to Roy, and I'll tell you when, and then you start and just make it kind of short." So I wrote out some, and I will tell you what I said. I said, "My first husband wanted to be Roy Eldridge. My subsequent husband knew Roy before I did. And now I'm dating a fellow who is a social liability because all he wants to do is talk about Roy Eldridge." I said, "Someday I hope to meet a man who thinks as much of me as he does of Roy."
That's wonderful.
Jean, as we head up towards the film that you produce, I just want to briefly, I don't know how it would work into the interview, but your stepmother.
Yes, I can work it in.
Okay, because this will
Stick with me, everybody.
blow your mind again.
A great figure in all these jazz histories is, it always kind of starts with a man named James Reese Europe. And he apparently had a very important all-black band, and they went off to Europe. They went to war, actually, and when they came back, they were celebrated and everything. And he died before much later, but that had been the orchestra for the Castles, Vernon and Irene Castle, later immortalized by Fred and Ginger on the screen. Terrible movie. But Irene also knew U.B. Blake and Noble Sissel. I think she knew Noble Sissel very well. So all these people had played for the Castles, and so it never got me any place with any of the musicians that I met. Well, yes, U.B. actually, I did bring that up, but it was a little too early for these other jokers up in the picture. I couldn't boast about Irene. She married my father. He was her final husband. And if you go up to Woodlawn, marvelous thing to do. Woodlawn is such heaven up there, and all the famous people are buried there. You ought to get a map and just look and see who's all arranged. And they're miniature Parthenons and beautiful little temples and just sensational stuff. And Irene's grave, well, it was Vernon Castle. He got shot down in World War I. And so she had this, she was dating at the time somebody else, Ben Alley Hagen, who was a scenic designer for Ziegfeld and a lot of people. So he made this sort of portico of columns with wisteria winding around at semicircle. And then I guess Vernon Castle's grave is in the middle. And then in the front is this beautiful nude by Prince Trubetskoy. We think it's Irene. I don't know. It looks gorgeous. She's in mourning. And so then when Daddy died, she said, we'll put, she called him Pappy, and put Pappy's ashes up there. So Irene is a sort of sandwich between her first and her fourth husband. That's Daddy. And it's wonderful. But some of the other graves are worth them. I'm a big graveyard goer. If you're ever in Copenhagen, everybody, you'll see my rhododendron bush at Ben Webster's grave. It was so bare when I went to see it the first time, and I thought, this will never do. So Billy Moore Jr. was a friend of mine. He was the president of the Ben Webster Society, so I sent him, I think it was $75. I thought, my God, that should do it in New York. Well, it's practically a forest of rhododendrons now because the Copenhagen prices were better. So then the last time I was there, I went to look at it, see how my flowers were doing, and some rotten egg, some Dane, who called himself Hepcat Jensen or something, he has a grave right next to it, and everything's in gold. It's kind of dwarfs Ben Webster. I'll have to fix his up again a little bit.
How did Ben? That's far out when I think about it. I don't want to dwell on it. Oh boy, she's slipping a lot of stuff in here. I hope you're getting it all. But how did Ben Webster come into your life, Jean?
Well, he never did. I just admired him from afar, and I'd see him. But I would hear these insane stories. One day, Babs Gonzalez and I think it was Jonah Jones rang my doorbell, and they were both laughing. They said, "We just want to sit down. We're talking about Ben Webster." I said, "Well, he's something else." So they sat down. They told one story after another. I mean, he was so colorful. I mean, you must know a million of them. He was always throwing chairs around and doing all kinds of stuff. No, I just remember when he joined Ellington, and I was discussing it with Ivy, and she said, "Oh, we play so many college dates these days," and she said, "All the kids want to hear is tenor, tenor, tenor. Where's the tenor?" And so apparently they wanted a formidable tenor soloist, and boy, they got him. He was the greatest. Great, great. Although I will say I was at a Harry Lim record date one time, and Ben was playing, and Harry had a sharp tongue. He said, "Oh, you think you're so great. If it wasn't for Coleman Hawkins, you'd be nothing." And I said, that didn't go over too well with any of us.
There's a story about an alto saxophone player named Gene Quill, and supposedly someone went to hear him play in a club one night, and they said, "You're not doing anything." They said, "You're just playing like Charlie Parker. That's all you're doing." So he took the saxophone off his neck and said to the guy, "Here, you try it." It's just not so easy. Not so easy to do. In the intervening years, how did you keep your foot in the jazz world as you married and as you became a radio producer and as you became just doing so many different things? How did jazz stay in your life?
Well, I guess living in New York didn't hurt. In the olden days it was Chicago, which was the hip place to be if you wanted to hear jazz. But in New York, you just count things. I live in the Village, and there are just a million places. There always were, as long as I have lived there, where there's jazz going on. Now I have to find out when they start, because Dizzy's Club I love, because you can go there at 7 o'clock and eat dinner and be home in bed by 9:30, and that kind of appeals to me. But I guess just going out. I didn't do anything official. Oh yeah, I wrote a few liner notes for Mr. Erdogan. That's my moment of glory. That was great. And I don't know what I've done in connection officially. Didn't book any of them on some guests were pretty good on the radio, but during the years I was booking Arlene's show, I was kind of careful. I think I did have Ellington one time, and I got complaints from members of the Ellington Society. Some man out in Wisconsin said, "What happened?" Well, I mean, Arlene wasn't very good, and he was very uptight. He's a tough interview, Ellington. You can't pull things out of him, he's very guarded. Bobby was a little like that, too, Bobby Short. He was, kind of, if you wanted to run it, you couldn't drag him into some subject. Although I must say, the stuff I've seen since Bobby's died, they've gotten all these documentaries out and stuff. He's been quite wonderful. They pick out great stuff. I saw a Charlie Rose interview with him, and it was just so warming and feeling.
Well, Bobby actually did, for our very first Jazz Museum in Harlem, little interview series.
Oh, really?
We did a night over at the Museum of the City of New York a couple of years ago.
Uh-huh.
And same thing, he just
Yeah.
turned it on and was just,
Oh, isn't that great? Yeah, when he's feeling good.
yeah.
That's good. Yeah, well, he and I went back, I'm not sure if it was 63 or 64 years, but that's a long time to stay. He always used to say, and we've never had a fight. That was all his doing because he was very, very tactful. Very good.
Well, I'll tell you folks, what we're going to do is we are going to take a break, and we have some libation and some water also. No, we have some to drink and some food and some cookies and stuff. But before we take our first break, are there any questions from the audience or any statements that anyone would like to make? Ahmed, let me get my.
I'd just like to thank you. I'd like to thank you, Jean, for many of the things you mentioned, which I haven't heard in many years. It was nice to hear Harry Lim's name, because I remember Harry from the very early days of New York jam sessions and the early days of 52nd Street. And I remember one night Harry Lim and I took a young white guitar player who was interested in playing jazz. We took him up to Harlem to a place where he could play with Lester Young, and that was Les Paul.
No kidding. Oh, that's so
And that was, I got must have been 1938. But when you were talking about the playfulness of Ben Webster, I was there the night in Washington when he played at One Nighter at a place called Turner's Arena. That night when Duke Ellington had just gotten through welcoming everybody and telling them they loved them madly. And he walked back to the piano to sit down, and Ben Webster pulled the chair out from under him, and he fell on the floor. And that was the night that Ben Webster was fired. But thank you so much for such wonderful tales. You made a wonderful evening for me. Thank you.
I want you all to stop having fun, stop talking, stop eating, stop mingling, stop being social.
Stop laughing.
Stop laughing. How you doing? No, because we're gonna have an equally good time when we start. I said half facetiously. But anyway, as we come back, it's when this moment happens every other week. I feel like the band leader, because I am a band leader in another part of my life. We're trying to get the band back on the bandstand. Everybody's talking. You're all a bunch of jazz musicians. But what I mean by that is, in all seriousness, is that as we build the museum, I'll tell you something. If I could bottle the good feeling in this room right now, I mean, if I could bottle it and put it somewhere, I would, because I think that that's what's the key of a good institution. Can we close the door, because it's getting hot in here? I think we have the air conditioner on. Thank you. So, wait, got quiet quick.
I think you have all of it because you bring it out every second Thursday night.
Sure do.
Thank you. As I've heard it said, from your mouth to God's ears. Someone said that, or to the governor's ears, of whoever's going to give us a building. But anyway. Jean. Yeah. I was going to drink the microphone.
That was funny. Did best of us, Lord.
Okay. Don't light a match, right? Anyway. want to head towards the, this is rapidly becoming the kind of interview that we do. It becomes clear that this has to be just a part one. So I'm going to, it's like when you go to be a tourist and you eventually learn when you go to a great city that you can't see everything. And don't knock yourself out trying to see everything, just see what you can and go back. And in terms of the interview, and for those out there, because already just mingling, a lot of folks have already said, ask her this, ask her that, ask her this, and all this kind of stuff. And so I think we'll go as far as we can, and then we'll just come back and do a second part. And I should mention just real quick that we are starting an educational initiative with the museum. And starting in the fall, we got some education money to go into the Frederick Douglass Academy, which is at 148th and Adam Clyde. No. You take number 3 train to the last stop, which is 148. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so it is 148. You're right. I'm arguing with you. And we're going to take an educational program built out of the Harlem Speaks series. We're going to take some of our honorees and do 3 or 4 week curriculum with the students. So they'll learn about the people and all this kind of stuff. And another thing which Wilhelmina and I were talking about before is, if any of you, and some of you say this informally, are interested in volunteer work, whether it's coming early, frankly, on a Thursday and helping us set up the church. We had a lovely woman came in tonight, she showed up an hour early, and the first she said, can I help? We said, you can wash some grapes. So thank you very much.
That's community.
But I mean it. And so, we just sat here and set the church. If there aren't any of you who would like to, when you leave, please see me or see Wilhelmina. And if you'd like to come by early on a Thursday or stay a little bit late as we break it down, or come by during the week sometime to help with them, we would love to have you, right? Right, Wilhelmina? Because it's just the 2 of us here, so that's a fact. So, as we head towards the film, and leaving all that intermediate space for another interview, what's the genesis of this film?
Am I on the air? No. Oh, yes, I am. I mentioned this fellow that I was going out with who went to a jazz party that I was at. These things that they have around the country where you pay something. You have to be invited because I guess they can't handle the crowds, but then you pay a certain amount and you stay in a hotel for a weekend, and there's all kind of jazz musicians that are grouped together. I think it started in Denver with Dick Gibson, and he would ask people from different disciplines, and there'd be, I remember Al Gray saying, they've got me up there with all those Dixieland people. I don't know any of those songs. I said, well, they're not very complicated. Jada, jazz and blues. But that was the idea. So this was a jazz party where Milt Hinton, who was America's sweetheart, as you know, everybody was crazy about him. He was there, and Charles Graham said to him, boy, he said, you're in that picture, that great photograph that was in Esquire. He said, I bet you must have brought your camera along and taken some pictures too. So Milt said, better than that, I brought my, some kind of a movie camera, 8mm, and he said, I said, you mean to say there's footage of that? You mean the photograph is coming to life? He said, it's better. He said, because it's in color. He said, that's just in black and white. These people are moving around and everything. I said, oh my heavens. Now, I had just gotten through it, WOR, I think. No, not just, a few years back, but I didn't have anything to do. I was rattling around looking to get into some mischief. I knew nothing about making a movie, and that still applies, by the way. Don't ask me anything. I'm still learning. But I thought that might be a good idea for me to do something about that photograph. And at the time, I knew quite a few of them still alive, and I thought, well, that's good. Some of the greats had already died, unfortunately, but and most were in town. This picture was taken when people tended to live nearby. They all lived either in Manhattan, the people in this photograph, or across one river over in Jersey where Dizzy and all those people lived, or across the other river where Roy and all of Count Basie and people lived across the East River. So it was kind of handy. So I thought maybe, I said to Milt, is there any way we can get hold of that footage? He said, sure. And I said, that would be absolute bliss. So with that in mind, I started lining people up to film them with the idea of seeing this historic footage and cutting it into the regular film. Well, I sound like I knew what I was doing. Well, absolutely did not. I thought the way you edited was you'd film for a while and then you'd stop and then you'd take the end of that piece of film and hook it onto the top of the next piece of film and then you'd go on to edit. No, he said, this expert I got working with me, he said, that's not the way you edit. You have to hire an editor. Well, there went some dollar bills with wings on them. Everything he told me turned out to be something with money. It was getting kind of depressing, but I was well along into the film before I couldn't get out by this time. But meanwhile, the film was not surfacing. I'd see Milt, he'd be doing gigs around the country and occasionally doing one in New York. I'd go to see him and he'd say, it's in the basement. He said, I just haven't found it yet. I'd say, I trust you, Milt, with my fingers crossed. I thought he's never going to find it. Well, I do. I'm stuck with all this footage. He'd say, no, I'll find it. So finally I began to get a little frantic. And there was a man who was a professor at Temple University who had been a fan of Milt's as a teenager, wanted to become a bass player himself, and was still very much in Milt and Mona's life. So I got in touch with him in Philadelphia. I said, survey your student body and pick out the brightest one, and please go down into Milt's basement and pick up every piece of celluloid you can find and hold it up to the light because I'm getting desperate. So it took them quite a while, but they found apparently this basement was like an old television show. Fibber, McGee, and Molly had a closet that they had where everything would come tumbling out. So with all the other debris in there, they finally found this wrecked piece of film, and it had to be patched up, and it was an extinct process. They had to find somebody who could work with it and everything. But you'll see, you've seen it if you've seen the film. It's worked in rather well, and just gave a little life to it. But that's what really propelled me into the flicker business, just hearing Milt say that he had some film. And then it kind of took off on its own, had a life of its own after that.
One of the things that I enjoy so much about the film, I mean, it's such a great composition. I mean, there's a narrative structure to it. It starts somewhere, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's great humor in it. The editing of it is like, you know, it's like a Hollywood film, in other words, where there's a laugh, there's a pause, because you probably knew that people were going to laugh and they wait, and all these great lines. And I'm wondering, how did you actually start the interview process, finding the musicians, deciding on where the interview would be, and how did you conduct the interviews? Because you got such gold out of them. How did you do it?
I'm not sure myself how. I think the editing fixed it up. I think she found the dull passages and got rid of them and picked up the lively ones. Some were more difficult than others. Art Blakey was deaf as a post, and of course, why wouldn't you be playing those drums? And he was very hard to locate. I had a great deal of trouble. If they weren't in the Union Book or in the Manhattan Phone Book, I was up a tree. I didn't know what to do. And I would ask around, and finally somebody said to me, it's whichever woman he's living with at the time. Well, that wasn't much help. And I had to keep asking questions. And once in a while I'd get a phone number. And this happened more than once. I'd call up, and there'd be a woman answering. I'd ask for Art. She'd say, no, he's not here. No, I have no idea where he is. No, he's not coming back. Bang. I can't tell you. As I say several times. So I figured, well, this is not going anyplace. I was always one woman too late. What am I going to do? I finally did make a connection. I think Brian Lynch, the trumpet player, finally headed me in the right direction. And the woman was delightful, charming, beautiful woman, and he was living in quite wonderful splendor in a kind of penthouse, and he couldn't have been more cordial. And it just, I thought, oh boy, it was worth all the sweat and trouble I went through. But I would ask him questions, and his answers were not responsive to the questions because he didn't have a clue what he was asking. And then even if he did, he was so kind of goofy himself. I said, I would ask people just dumb questions to get them rolling. I'd say, you know, what means of transportation did you take to get to the site, or how did you find it, or something? He said, I didn't have to go nowhere. That was my house. Well, it wasn't his house. He lived 20 blocks north of there. And so I left it in. I thought, who cares? then Sue got when if you're ever written about in the newspaper, they always get stuff wrong.
Right.
And then it becomes a matter of record, and then you're stuck with it. That's your life story. So, but and then, the other trick that I got, Sahib Shahab was a wonderful musician, but he spent his time in Europe because he was very upset about conditions in America. And he took a Muslim name, and he worked very well. And a friend of Ahmet's, George Ginley from South America, was so thrilled when I told him that Sahib was in the movie, because that was one of his favorites. He did, the European scene. But he was coming back to die. The poor guy had unrepairable cancer, whatever you call it, and came to New York just to stay a couple of nights, I think. And what's the man that was on it? Stuart Troop was on the New York Newsday, and he took me out there, and it was out at Hale Woodruff was a music person, and he was putting Sahib up for a couple of days, and I went out with my crew, and the poor guy was so sick, and they had him all dressed up in kind of a brown velvet jacket, and he was making an effort, and they had a lovely buffet laid out and everything, and he just was so weak, and I thought, oh, this is criminal, I shouldn't be doing this to him. But I found that if you bring up the subject of monk, everybody'd come to life. Everybody had a monk story, and he had quite a few. And so it's not in the main movie because it's such a downer to see this poor guy who did indeed die just maybe a week or two after the interview. But he's trying to talk about a recording that he did with Monk. And it was, he tried to sing it because none of us, we didn't know what he was talking about, but he knew he couldn't think of the title. And we're throwing titles at him. No, that wasn't it. That wasn't it. And then finally he started to sing it. Well, it was intricate as heck. And I went home and I got every Monk record out I had and played them. And I found it. It's called 4 and 1. And I must have transposed it because I thought he was in the same key. Well, he wasn't, but the tempo was exactly accurate. Now, he made this, I think, 20 or 30 years before or something, and it was as though he was in the studio. He was still doing it again. So Sue has combined the playing of the recording and his singing it somehow. We should have worked on getting the pitch to match, but at any rate, that's in the DVD. But the Monk stories were very useful. I found when I'd hit a wall, then I'd just throw in Monk, and that's how that worked.
Did you know Monk at all, Jean?
I just met him once at Jerry Mulligan's, and he said something very endearing to me, and I don't think he had a clue what he was saying or who I was. He was in a rocking chair, and I was sitting at his feet, and he said something like, I was so sincere, or who knows what it was, but it was nice. We had a brief exchange. My passing associations with these people suddenly become so prized by the people that I've been showing the film to. I've been doing art museums, and some guy came to the art museum in Dallas, and he had a pork pie hat on and some kind of a costume. He said, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "About what?" He said, "Don't you recognize it? It's Lester Young." I said, "Well, it is, come to think of it." He said, "Did you ever know him?" So I'm thinking, oh, Lord, I wish I'd known Lester better, because I would make this man happy. Well, I had met Lester. Norman Grant had introduced me to him, and we'd had a brief conversation, not much, didn't really get into anything memorable. But I said, yeah, I met him, we shook hands. Oh, she shook his hand? Oh, he shook his hand. I mean, that was enough reward. He was so glad he'd come, he met me, because I shook Lester's hand. So you'll notice in the DVD, when I get to people like that, I tell stories that other people have told me, but no personal encounter that's worth anything.
So you make the movie, and for those of you that have seen the movie and the DVD that you're referring to, it's newly out. Is it available?
No, it's not out yet, because
Coming soon.
In
there
Japan,
is so
it's
much
out.
stuff. I mean, I couldn't believe that we're still approving stuff in the contract. I mean, how long does this take? It was supposed to be ready in January. Lauren and I were in California in January, and I'd sprung for a booth at this big jazz educators convention, and everything was so awkward because my editor was supposed to have it done the year before when they were in New York. I think they're going to be back in New York this year, so we don't have to pay for our airplane fares. But Sue was forever taking off to Europe. She'd go for, 3 weeks or a couple of months or something. So the editing took a long time, but it was all ready to be, we thought, put out after we got back from California. And we're still dotting the I's and crossing the T's in the contract. So watch this space is all I can say.
How does the DVD compare with the original film?
Well, it's 5 times as long.
Oh, that's good.
Well, because listen, if you talk about each one of these people, that's one whole disc, and that's a half hour. That's what is it, an hour? No, 3 hours. I don't know. Yes, 3 hours, I guess. All right, that's one. And then on the other disc, I've got all these imitation. Well, you've mentioned that before. Once the movie came out, every city and hamlet had a copycat photo made.
And Jazz Museum also.
And the Jazz Museum, yes, very snappy people. It started in California. Hugh Hefner had a sneak preview of the movie, and so he got too many musicians together. So you can't pick anybody out. Looks like a dog's lunch. So he never printed it in any magazine. But I blew it up a little bit, and that's there. And then it went from there to Philadelphia, and you can spot a lot of wonderful people in Philadelphia. Jimmy Heath and all kind of wonderful people. And then it went around the world. And I just got one from Australia. That's Sydney, Australia. And again, you can't tell who's who. And even if you knew them, you wouldn't be able to. Well, the thing is, how many musicians do you know in Australia? They said 250 people showed up to take this
Oh,
picture.
my
That's
goodness.
too many.
That's right.
Barely makes it if you blow it up. And then there was one from Holland that I quite liked, The Great Day in Harlem, and they spell Harlem with 2 A's, which is what they do. And that's quite sweet. And then there was one in the Smithsonian Magazine, and it was taken in front of this very house here, and it was all the black businessmen, and in the middle is Bill Clinton. So that's kind of cute. Yeah.
Of all the material that came out in the original film and then in the DVD, were there any favorite scenes or anything that for one reason or another just couldn't make it in for either editing reasons, or it didn't fit the story, or it was a bad camera angle, or the light was wrong, or just something?
Well, yes, there's hardly any Jerry Mulligan because Sue, my editor, took against him. I kept saying, Sue, for Pete's sakes, we were there all day long, and there are these wonderful scenes where we're seated. He lived quite grandly, and he had servants, and he said, will you come for lunch? Well, I'd had lunch there before. It was quite nice. I said, sure. And beautiful silverware and crystal, and as I say, it was in contrast to most other scenes at home. So I thought that would be kind of interesting. And Sue said she didn't care for him. She thought she didn't care for his attitude. And so it worked against me because I figured, well, she's the editor. She knows where she's going. When the film came out, I was on every television show there is, and they would call up, and very often they would say, will you bring somebody? And I'd say, well, I'd always try and get Marion involved because we're buddies and the same age and everything. So sometimes they'd say no. Oh, when I was on Charlie Rose, they said, well, we're kind of hoping for a couple of black people. I thought, oops, I realized how I got on that show. It was the end of February, and I guess they hadn't had any black people for the whole month of February. So I just squeaked in. And I brought 2 very articulate musicians, I think Benny Golson and Art Farmer. And so that worked okay. But when ABC called me, they wanted Jerry, and they said, we're going to have, people often ask for Jerry, and he would always turn me down. And at ABC, they said, well, we want to, and as a matter of fact, they made the picture bigger than this, I think, for the setting. And they called me up, they said, what's the biggest print you have? And I told them, they said, oh no, we want something for a backdrop. And so I got the man on the phone who had the negative, and I held the phone and listened in. And they said, how much? And he said, oh, I used to tell this story and I knew what it was. It was some huge amount of money, like $600 and something. He said, but that includes the framing or the backing or something. So I thought, oh boy, that's a good thing to have. So I thought, when it's over, they don't know I've been listening in. I'll offer them $100, and then maybe they'll let me have it. And so we barely got off the air, and they said, "Do you want the picture?" I said, "Well, yes, I do." So I didn't have to pay the $100. So I called my beau in the country, and he had a little Volkswagen. I said, "Get some string and drive fast, because I think it's going to rain, and you can put this thing on the roof and bring it in." Anyway, Jerry wasn't in the picture, and that was too bad, because, well, I mean, he was in a little bit, but every time I'd call him, I didn't know why he kept turning me down. And finally one day he answered the phone. He said, "This is the face on the cutting room floor." Of course, he was right. I mean, I was on his side. So I said, "Listen, Jerry, we've got all this footage. We can make a separate thing about you." So he said, "Fine." He didn't tell me he was dying. But on the boat, we were on a cruise together, and he gave me the names of all these big shots that I could get to be in his film, and a lot of Hollywood people, and Zubin Mehta, of course. And then he died. So what I did was use the stuff I already had, and then get people like Andre Previn and Johnny Mandel and Bill Crow, people who are good talkers. So it's actually pretty good if I ever bring it out. That's one. And then anything else I had left over went into the DVD. So you'll see it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in those bios that I was doing.
So you make a film, then what happens when a film is done and actually getting it out to the public? Because like you mentioned, you were on a lot of TV shows. The thing was a huge splash when it came out, which was 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Exactly 10 years ago, yeah.
Right. I mean, it was big.
Yeah.
And most jazz things are not big. How did that happen?
Beats me. It played a lot of art houses, and then it's such a short film, you see, that we could have a turnover. So the film that everybody was hot about, particularly Ebert and Siskel, were saying, "Oh, this film should win the Oscar," and that was Hoop Dreams, the basketball film. And it was a marvelous film. Played at the same theater that my film was playing, but we wiped the floor up with them, because we'd have 7 showings of ours and make all that money, and poor Hoop Dreams was lucky if they could get 3 in a day. So anyway, yeah, so anyway, it did get nominated for an Oscar, and that was nice. I didn't believe it when the man called me up, but that's another story. Anyway.
So first whack at filmmaking, and you're nominated for an Academy Award.
That's it.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
So then some of the leftover footage, I mean, I got enough to live off my fat, I guess, till the year 3000. We made into a short called The Spitball Story.
Has anyone here seen Spitball? I hope you've seen it. It's,
No.
Where do you see Never it? Heard of it.
Well, good question.
thank you.
It was, yeah, I don't know. Well, I'm going to have to clear the music again. That means paying more money if I bring it up. It was tied together with a great day when one of the many record companies, it kept moving from record company to record company, and finally it went to these Mormons who didn't quite know how to promote it, and they put both of them in together. And that's the last commercial release, and then I couldn't afford to renew the music rights, although I guess I've got them in perpetuity now. I don't know about Spitball. It's the story of how Dizzy got fired from Cab Calloway's orchestra. It's quite funny. And it's a short.
Jean, there's one person who's not in this picture, and again, I mean, all the people that you've known in your life, but just to ask questions about the one major jazz figure who's not here, I guess. But the big omissions would be Ellington and Armstrong, I guess,
Yeah.
right?
Well, right.
Among others. Well,
yeah.
they were probably on the road, I assume, or is
Oh,
there a story
absolutely.
as to...
Well, I have a postcard from Miles from Germany with a picture of a little blonde girl. He said, "Here's you at age 5 or something." So I thought that was kind of cute. Luckily, I saved it, so I have that to prove that he wasn't in New York. And Ellington obviously was out of town, but the 3 members of his orchestra who had left were in the photograph.
Yeah.
Sonny and Lawrence and who's the other one? Rex. Oh God, yes, Rex. Wonderful. Yeah, so that's that. But I'd be playing different places with this movie, and people would say, "Why isn't Stan Kenton in there?" They'd be mad at me. And sometimes they'd ask about dead people. I don't know much about that.
You didn't think about that.
When Art Kane was given the assignment to photograph those 4 pillars of jazz, he got out to Kansas City. It turned out that Charlie Parker was not available. So he went to his mother's house and managed to con her into lending him Charlie Parker's saxophone case. Then he went out to the graveyard and went to the Charlie Parker grave and set the saxophone case down, opened it up so you could see the instrument inside, and that was his portrait of Charlie Parker. Pretty neat. I don't know what they were thinking when they told him to get a picture of Charlie Parker.
Wow.
I remember once at Rutgers University that we did a concert with Benny Carter, and they gave an award to Benny Carter, a memorial award for Fletcher Henderson, who had died, of course, many, many years before. So Benny took the award. He said, "Thank you very much. I'd like to accept this on behalf of my old dear friend, my old band leader, Fletcher Henderson. I'd just like to figure out a way to get it to him, not in person."
That's funny.
Some weird kind of jinx or something. Yeah. What do you think at... I don't know if this is a fair question to ask you because it's your creation, but what is it about the film that you think objectively makes it so good? I mean, what are the core elements?
Well, I think the secrets are, if anybody's going into film business, I don't advise it, but anyway, is the editing is so... Sue didn't want anybody's eyes to glaze over, so she kept you on your toes. You know, you can see this film many times and you keep seeing new stuff in it. I never get bored looking at it. I find it very interesting. And then I think the secret, Johnny Mandel picked the music out. And boy, it's up. The minute it starts, you're kind of on the balls of your feet. I think he picked out very good music. And we have a mutual friend who has a radio show, and I think they're just getting over this terrible thing. For a number of years, they would have the bridges between interviews with some kind of somber music. It would go, I think that's not going to hold my interest. And then this producer of his kept scheduling that, kept saying to him, "Tell her to get some, lively stuff in there to keep you interested." "Oh," he said, "I can't, that's her territory." So I don't know what's happened, but it's gotten kind of more lively. Have you listened lately?
Yes.
It's a little
much
better.
more lively.
Yeah.
Much more lively.
So lively music is what
I
it is.
think we can talk I think we can tell them what radio show it is because
Oh, yeah.
it's such a great show.
Yeah.
It's Lenny Lopate's Around New York. Is that the name of it? No. Leonard Lopate and Company.
Yeah. It's something like
And it's
that.
on WNYC AM from 12 and FM now from 12 to 2. But it's also on the internet because I don't know if there's something called a podcast now.
Oh, yeah, they have
And you can actually
everything.
download it and play it on your little tape machine or something like that. But
But I
it's
used
a
to
wonderful show.
Live for the one day a month when he'd have the woman who talks about grammar, because Loren had made a whole set of tapes for Lenny of different wonderful bands playing Three Little Words, and that was so good, and it suddenly livened the show up. I suddenly listened to the rest of it.
So this is the point where we open it up for questions and or comments from the audience. I know we have one very, very unusual request that we'll save till the end because we're going to make you wait for that. Very, very good. But outside of that one unusual request, we'd like to... You're the unusual request. You're the unusual request. Wait. Okay. He wants you to sign a T-shirt.
Oh, we
Okay.
will.
Okay. I'm just wondering whether you'll be wearing it when she signs it. But we'll start with my friend Louis Feinstein.
You did speak a little bit about Milt Hinton, but I would be curious. You started the interview tonight by saying that Art Kane was really not a photographer. But I do know that Milt was, and you do see Milt in the film. But I remember going to a photography exhibit up here in Harlem of Milt's work, and I also remember Phil Schaap talking about, in a sense, the way you did, about how he would be down at Milt's basement and basically learn about jazz going through Milt's collection. And so I'm curious, was Milt involved any more in the making of the film, other than just, you know, providing you with the celluloid? Did he did you actually go to his home? Did you talk to him? Did you plan any of this with him?
No, but I agree with you. His pictures are so social documents. I mean, he had this great span of the 30s and 40s and 50s, and pictures of the guys in the band standing out in front of a sign that says "colored only" and stuff. It's really historic and marvelous, and they're beautifully made photographs, still photographs. I don't know if he did much with the movie. I think that was just a toy that he had, and he handed it to Mona, and she said, "I didn't know much about how to, honey, I don't know how to make a movie." He said, "Honey," he said, "just aim the camera and push the button." And so that's what she did.
We should mention that there's actually two books. As you probably know, there's a book called Baselines.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, I mean, I don't want to sound like Joe Franklin, to tell you to go out and buy something. But I mean, if you're going to buy a book and a great present for someone, and I think it's in soft cover now, so maybe less expensive. It's called Baselines, and it's Milt Clinton's photographs from the 30s through the 50s and 60s, and they're absolutely wonderful. And then they made a film. The guy who did the book with him, a guy named David Berger, made a movie, a documentary about Milt, which we actually showed at our planning conference that we had for the museum. And he's run up against a little bit of what you were referring to before, which is he can't, for his film, he can't pay the music rights.
Oh no, he's in big trouble, and I mean that it's terrible. I've told, and then the greatest film on Duke Ellington I've ever seen. Levy, David Levy, is that his first name? Something Levy. Anyway, he was just a cameraman, and it never occurred to him to find out about music rights. I wanted him to work with me on my film, and he said, "Oh no," he said, I'm in such trouble now with mine. And I said, "Well, if you work for me," he said, "Are you kidding? You don't have enough money. It's going to be terrible." And he's never gotten the money together. And have you ever seen that film of his?
No, I have not.
Oh my God, I'll have to show it to you. It's the most, well, I've been knowing Ellington since 1936, so I figured that I, have an inside track on what he was like, and it was just perfect. It was so good. Anyway, Milt's pictures mostly were stills, and they were just super magnificent. David Berger, we got into a little complication there, because I think after I decided I was going to use what he was able to salvage, they suddenly wanted it for his film, and there's a lot of it that you think you're like two trains running on the same track or something, because it does, but it's fine, it's good footage.
This side, any questions? Anybody? We have a microphone. Anything? Any comments? Questions? Oh,
We got a
what a
question
happy,
over here.
content group. Over here.
This gentleman.
This gentleman over here.
What is the secret of your longevity and your vitality?
I guess it's, well, I don't know, I was going to say your parents, but my father died at about 70, but my mother was 94, and she just died out of meanness because she hated the world.
She died out of meanness.
So that's the secret of longevity, and I don't have any vitality. I mean, I just go out early and get home early, and that's about it. But and also keeping interested. A friend of mine, a classmate of mine, got me into a club where they have kind of organized events, for club members, and she said to me one day, "Are you interested in what the heck was it? Something about ancient Greece or something?" I said, "Oh yeah, they're having a talk at lunch tomorrow." I said, "Sure." I said, I'm interested. I said, "That's what's wrong. I'm interested in everything. I mean, I'm voracious, and it takes me half a day to read all the papers I read every day." And I guess that, you have to keep going. Artie Shaw was going to kill himself, and he fell and broke his shoulder and his elbow and everything else, and he said he couldn't do anything. He was absolutely trapped, and it was very discouraging. And he was interested in guns anyway. And then suddenly in his mail there came something that said he was going to receive an honor from some podunk university or something in 2 weeks. So he thought, well, I got to stay alive for that. And then, these things kept him going, these little bits of recognition.
Anyone else over here? Well, Jean, of all the, oh, I'm sorry. Taja, of course.
I just wanted to thank you so much. I think it was such an interesting life you've had, and you're just a wonderful person, and we're so glad that you were able to tell your story.
Well, back at you, Tasha. She's had an interesting life. That's great.
Jean, I have a question for you. All the music you've heard and all the people you knew, if you could construct a band, who would be in your all-time band?
Well, it's going to be a problem because I'm going to have about 4 tenors and God knows how many. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. That's a good question, but you ought to warn people in advance. It happened to Leonard Feather. He was supposed to pick 2 on each instrument to be engraved in the sidewalk in Kansas City. They were going to have a jazz week in Kansas City. Thing fell through, luckily. But they were going to etch in the names of the 2 greatest clarinet players, the 2 greatest drummers, and so forth. So Leonard, one name just slipped his mind. He thought of Buddy DeFranco and Benny Goodman. And when word got back to Artie closed the iron door. Now, it was Leonard, the thing never got accomplished, it didn't matter, but Leonard felt so terrible, and he kept trying to make overtures. Artie, it was the stupidest thing, I should have put you there, and so forth. Artie would have none of it. Then he closed the iron door on his whole family, and it was terrible. So it's you can't just do like that and make people speak because it's too demanding at my age and my condition.
What music do you listen to most at home?
Well, I listen to BGO, and whatever they play is nice. I like, I know the people I like I never get to hear. Ahmad Jamal, I'm crazy about him. I never hear him. I have a few records. But naturally Ellington, and naturally, gosh, these are hard for me. It's like asking who your favorite children are. I don't have any. I beat that rap.
I want to thank you so much for coming. I want to thank you for what is clearly part 1 of something that we can go on with. And to say there's so many questions in advance, it's like hearing a great set in a nightclub or something like that. You're leaving me wanting more.
Oh, that's
And
so
I do
good.
want a lot more. And I'd like to mention to everyone that we are going to continue over the summer, like we always do. I hope you've all signed our mailing list. We're having Bill Saxton here on the 28th of July. And then we're having Celino Clark, great organ player. If you don't know him, then you're missing something. He'll be here on August 11th, and then coming up on the 25th, the author Herb Boyd will be here. So once again, Jean, thank you. Let's give Jean Bach a rousing. And if we can just maybe take a moment, we're going to present Jean with our Jazz Museum plaque and take a picture.
Stand for this. Ooh, thank you.
And we'll put you in the middle.
No. Okay, here we go. It's cookies. It's cookies.